14 military working dogs were locked in steel kennels, trembling, crying, waiting to be sold to the highest bidder. Dogs that had sniffed out bombs in Fallujah. Dogs that had pulled terrorists off rooftops in Syria. Dogs that had bled beside their handlers and kept going. Now labeled surplus. Now labeled disposable. Buyers were already circling the kennels. Dogfighters, foreign contractors, men who saw dollar signs where medals should have been. Nobody spoke for them. Nobody fought for them. Until a Navy SEAL in digital camouflage walked through that gate, saw exactly what was happening, and said 6 words that changed everything. "I will take all of them." No one expected what came next. Before we go any further, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We want to see how far this story travels. And if it moves you, please subscribe and follow it all the way to the end. This one is worth it. Jake Mercer heard the dogs before he saw them. Not barking, not growling, crying. The kind of sound that doesn't come from an animal that's hungry or restless. The kind that comes from something that remembers being needed and has just begun to understand it's been thrown away. Jake had heard that sound once before, in a courtyard outside a compound his team had just cleared in Mosul. The handler was dead inside. His dog was still sitting at the door, waiting for him to walk out. Jake had carried that sound in his chest for 5 years. Now it was coming from inside an American military facility on American soil, and his hands were already tight on the steering wheel before he'd even pulled into the lot. His phone had buzzed at 0430. Unknown number. One message. "They're selling all 14. Fort Braxton Disposition Center. Today. Come now. Bring your dog." He'd stared at the screen for 20 seconds. Then he'd grabbed his keys, clipped Rex's leash, and driven 3 hours without stopping, without coffee, without a single word spoken out loud because there was nothing to say yet, and everything to do. Rex sat rigid in the passenger seat, ears rotating like radar dishes, picking up frequencies Jake couldn't hear. The German Shepherd was 4 years out of active deployment, a tan and black animal with amber eyes that still tracked movement the way they'd been trained to track it, always slightly ahead of whatever was coming. Rex had been Jake's MWD partner through 2 combat tours before a compound breach in Ramadi put a piece of shrapnel through his left shoulder and ended his operational career. Jake had spent 4 months fighting the military bureaucracy to adopt him. 4 months of forms and phone calls, and a desk officer named Captain Paulson, who kept explaining that retired military working dogs were government property and required proper disposition protocols before transfer to private ownership. Jake had used every favor he had, called his congressman twice, and when the paperwork finally cleared and he drove to the kennel facility at dawn and opened the cage door, Rex had walked out, pressed his head against Jake's chest, and stayed there without moving for a long time. That was 4 years ago. Rex hadn't left his side since. Now they were standing at the gate of Fort Braxton Processing Center, and the sound coming from inside was making Rex's hackles rise in a ridge along his spine. "Easy." Jake put his hand on the dog's head. "Let's see what we're dealing with." He pushed through the gate. The first thing that hit him was the smell, kennel disinfectant and stress hormones, and something underneath both of those things, something sour and animal and desperate that Jake recognized from field hospitals and forward operating bases and every bad place he'd ever stood in. The second thing that hit him was the count. 14 kennels, 2 rows of 7. Some dogs were pacing in tight circles. Some were pressed against the back walls with their heads down. 2 were lying flat on their sides, eyes open, breathing shallow, wearing the expression that Jake had only ever seen on soldiers who had seen too much and were no longer trying to process it. And moving between the rows were civilians, maybe 30 of them, pointing, whispering, evaluating. A man in a leather vest was prying open the mouth of a Belgian Malinois to check its teeth. A woman with a clipboard was photographing ear tattoos. In the far corner, two men were arguing in low voices about bloodline documentation and resale value in overseas security contracts. Jake's stomach turned hard. "Can I help you, Chief?" The voice came from behind a folding table near the entrance. A man in Navy service khakis, mid-40s, thick through the middle, with the pale, undisturbed complexion of someone who had spent his career in climate-controlled offices. His name placard read, Lieutenant Commander Louis Vane. Beside him sat a cash box and a stack of transfer forms. "What is this?" Jake asked. "Surplus animal disposition event." Vane didn't look up from his clipboard. "Retired MWD assets, available for civilian transfer per DoD Directive 4715.21. You interested in bidding?" "These are military working dogs." "Retired military working dogs," Vane said. The correction came fast, like he'd made it 100 times. "Failed behavioral assessments. Deemed unfit for continued service or unit reintegration." "Standard protocol." Jake looked at the kennels. "Which ones failed?" "All of them." "That's not possible." Vane finally looked up. His eyes dropped to Jake's NWU Type 3 uniform, the green and brown digital camouflage, then to Rex, who was already pulling toward the kennels with his nose working hard and low. "That your dog?" "That's my partner." "Right." Vane's expression didn't change. "Bidding opens in 20 minutes. Cash or certified check only. All sales final. No returns. If you want to browse first, go ahead. Just don't open any kennels." Jake didn't respond. He was already moving. Rex pulled ahead, and the moment they reached the first row, every dog in the facility reacted. Heads came up. Ears rotated. Noses pressed through kennel bars. They could smell Rex, could smell the training and the work and the history in him, the chemical signature of a dog who had served and survived, and something ancient woke up behind their eyes. Not hope, exactly. Something more complicated than hope. Recognition. The way soldiers recognize each other in a crowd of civilians, without a word, across a room, because they share something that cannot be explained to anyone who wasn't there. Jake moved down the first row slowly. Titan. A shepherd with a chest like a barrel and a scar running from his left ear to his jaw. Jake had deployed alongside Titan's team in Syria. The dog had detected 22 IEDs across a 14-day operation. Had once alerted on a pressure plate buried 18 inches below a dirt road in the dark, saving a 6-man element that would have walked straight into it. Titan's handler, Sergeant First Class Ramon Delgado, had called him the best nose in the United States military. Said it without irony. Said it in the kind of voice men use for facts they don't need to defend. Now Titan was pressed against the kennel bars, his eyes locked on Jake, with an expression that wasn't fear, and wasn't quite hope, and wasn't anything Jake had a name for, except this. The look of a creature who remembers being trusted and is trying to understand why the trust stopped. "Hey, buddy." Jake crouched in front of the kennel. "What are you doing here?" Titan made a sound that cracked something open in the middle of Jake's chest. Not a bark, not a whine. A low, broken cry that came from somewhere deep in the dog's body. The kind of sound that shouldn't have a source in an animal built for silence and discipline. Rex pressed against the kennel beside Jake, nose to nose with Titan through the bars, and the two dogs held there together, two working animals speaking a language that had no words and needed none. Jake stood and moved to the next kennel. Ranger. Explosives detection. 6 years, 3 combat deployments. Ranger was lying flat, with his chin on his paws, eyes open but focused on nothing. He didn't react when Jake approached, didn't lift his head, didn't acknowledge the presence of another dog 3 feet away. He just breathed, shallow and steady, like a dog that had already decided no one was coming and had found a way to make peace with that. Jake pressed his fingers through the bars. Ranger's nose twitched. One slow registration, and then nothing. He looked away. "Ranger," Jake kept his voice low. "Come on, man." Nothing. Next kennel. Blitz, patrol and apprehension dog. Fastest shepherd Jake had ever seen in the field. The kind of animal that could run down a fleeing suspect across open desert and hold him until the team arrived. Blitz was pacing in tight circles, his breathing fast and shallow, his coat dull, his ribs faintly visible. He moved like something wound too tight for too long, like an engine running without oil, burning itself from the inside out. "Jesus," Jake said under his breath. Then he reached the last kennel in the row, and his heart stopped. Ghost. The name hit him before he even finished reading the tag. Ghost, Staff Sergeant Danny Rourke's dog. Danny's partner, the shepherd that had deployed with Jake's best friend on every mission for 3 years straight. The dog that had been beside Danny in Fallujah. The dog that had survived the IED blast that killed him. Jake hadn't seen Ghost since the funeral. After Danny died, he'd asked about the dog. Had been told Ghost was transferred to a training unit in the Southwest. Had been told not to worry about it, that the system took care of its assets. Had been told, more than once, to focus on his own recovery and let the process handle the rest. The process had handled it all right. Right into a steel kennel at a surplus disposal event. Ghost was lying on his side. His ribs showed through a coat that was dull and matted. His eyes were half closed. He looked like a dog that had stopped waiting, stopped hoping, stopped believing that the people who made promises intended to keep them. Jake dropped to his knees. "Ghost!" The dog's ear moved. One eye opened wider. And then, slowly, something shifted behind that eye. The way a light flickers on in a room that has been dark too long. Not bright, not sudden, just present. A faint, fragile, desperate kind of present. Ghost crawled forward on his belly, dragging himself across the kennel floor until his nose reached the bars and touched Jake's fingers. And then he cried. Not a bark, not a howl. A sound that carried 18 months of confusion and grief and waiting in it. A sound that said, "I know this smell. I know who this belongs to. I know this is as close as I am ever going to get to the man who didn't come home. And I have been lying here trying to understand why. And I can't. And I need someone to tell me it wasn't my fault." Jake gripped the kennel bars, pressed his forehead against the metal. Let the tears come, because there was no reason left to stop them, and no world in which pretending this was acceptable was a world he wanted to live in. Rex leaned against him, pressed his whole body weight against Jake's side, felt the grief move through his handler, the way dogs feel weather before it arrives, and responded the only way a dog knows how, by staying, by not leaving, by being the one thing in the room that was never going to walk away. Jake stood. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, turned around, walked back toward the folding table with Rex moving beside him. And every step across that floor was deliberate and quiet. And the way a man walks when he has already decided something, and is simply covering the distance between the decision and the action. Vane looked up when Jake reached the table. "I want all of them," Jake said. Vane blinked. "Excuse me?" "All 14 dogs. I'm taking all of them." A man standing nearby turned. then another, then the woman with a clipboard. The heavy man in the leather vest straightened up from where he'd been crouching and stared. The two men arguing about bloodlines went quiet. Vane's expression cycled through surprise, amusement, and then something that settled into the flat, practiced patience of a bureaucrat who has learned to wait out inconvenient people. You understand the total floor assessment on 14 animals is in the range of $120,000. I understand. And you understand these are government assets being disposed of through an official DoD process. This isn't a negotiation. I know what this is. Jake looked at him. Do you? Vane held the look for a moment. Then he picked up his clipboard. You've got 18 minutes before bidding opens. If you want to place a deposit, there's a form on the left side of the table. Otherwise, I'm going to need you to step aside. Jake picked up the form, turned it over, read it front to back in under a minute. Then he set it down and pulled out his phone and walked away from the table without another word. He had 18 minutes. He had exactly one call to make. And the man on the other end of that call was going to either save all 14 dogs or tell Jake something nobody wanted to hear. He dialed. It rang twice. Dad, Jake said, I need the farm. Frank Mercer didn't ask how much, didn't ask why. The man had spent 22 years in the Army and understood, without needing it explained, that when his son called at 7 in the morning, using that particular tone of voice, the situation was already past the point of questions. How many dogs? Frank said. 14. A pause, not hesitation. The kind of pause a man takes when he is running numbers in his head and deciding whether the numbers matter. The property's worth about $400,000. Bank opens at 8. I only need collateral for the deposit. I'll figure out the rest. Jake, Frank's voice dropped. Is this about Danny's dog? The question landed like a hand on the chest. Jake closed his eyes for half a second. Ghost is in one of the kennels, Dad. The silence on the other end was different this time. Heavier. Frank Mercer had known Danny Rourke since Danny was 17 years old, and showing up at their back door, with muddy boots and a broken bicycle, asking if Jake was home. He'd come to the funeral. He'd sat in the third row and stared at the flag on the casket and not said a word the entire day. I'll call the bank right now, Frank said. And Jake, bring him home. Jake hung up, turned around, and almost walked directly into Dr. Maya Chen. She was standing 3 feet behind him, small, early 30s, wearing a Fort Braxton veterinary staff badge and an expression that said she had been waiting for him specifically, that she had been waiting for someone exactly like him, and that she had been doing it for longer than was comfortable. You're the one who texted me, Jake said. I texted 12 people, Maya said. You're the only one who showed up. She glanced past him, toward the table where Vane was watching them, with the careful, unhurried attention of a man who is not worried, but wants to know what is being said. She lowered her voice. Walk with me, away from him. They moved toward the far end of the building. Rex walked between them, close to Jake's left leg, ears tracking Vane without turning his head. How long have you worked here? Jake asked. 8 months. Long enough. Maya kept her voice flat, the way people do when they are controlling something that wants to come out louder. Those dogs didn't fail behavioral assessments. Jake looked at her. What? Titan passed his last assessment 11 weeks ago. Ranger was flagged for a minor anxiety response during a reintegration exercise. That's not failure. That's normal. Blitz has a muscle strain in his left rear hip. Treatable. 4 to 6 weeks of rest, and he runs full operational again. She stopped walking. Vane reclassified all 14 of them inside of a 3-week window. Changed the assessment grades in the system retroactively. I have the original records. The words arranged themselves in Jake's mind, one at a time, each one colder than the last. Why would he reclassify 14 dogs at once? Maya reached into her jacket pocket and produced a USB drive. Small, black, no label. She held it between two fingers and looked at it the way people look at objects that have cost them something to obtain. There is a private security contractor out of Abu Dhabi. They pay 3 times the civilian market rate for former MWD assets. Trained dogs, proven in combat. They don't care about paperwork trails as long as the export documentation clears. She pressed the USB into his hand. Vane has been running this for at least 2 years. I found transaction records, draft contracts, and an export license application with a DoD authorization signature from a colonel who retired 18 months ago. Jake stared at the drive in his palm. He's selling them overseas. The transport truck is already on base. I saw it come through the east gate at 0600. They're not waiting for the auction to finish. The auction is theater. It's there to create a paper record of civilian transfer attempts before the export goes through. If anyone questions it later, Vane points to today and says he tried to place the dogs domestically first. Jake turned and looked back toward the kennels, toward Vane. The man was talking to one of the civilians now, relaxed, one hand in his pocket, the other gesturing at a clipboard. 14 dogs. 14 animals that had served on American missions, that had bled on American operations, that had protected American lives, being packaged and shipped overseas because one desk officer had figured out the price they fetched on the open market and decided that loyalty was a commodity with an expiration date. "When does the transport move?" Jake asked. "Tonight, after close of business. Once the auction paperwork is filed, the export documentation processes automatically." Maya's voice tightened. "I reported this to the base JAG office 6 weeks ago. Was told the matter was under review. Last week, I was informed the review found no irregularities. They buried it. Someone buried it. I don't know how high it goes. That's why I needed someone from outside the base." Jake looked down at the USB drive, looked at Rex, looked at Ghost's kennel at the end of the row, the dog still lying on his side, still breathing shallow, still wearing the expression of an animal that has made its peace with being forgotten. "Not today." "I need a copier," Jake said, "and I need 15 minutes alone with your computer." Maya looked at him. "Vane will notice if we both disappear." "Then make sure he's watching you while I'm not in the room." She nodded once, turned and walked back toward the table. Jake watched her stop in front of Vane and start asking questions, pointing at forms, leaning over the table with her clipboard, filling the man's field of attention completely. Jake walked in the opposite direction, found the door to the veterinary exam room, and pulled it closed behind him. He copied the drive in 4 minutes, sent compressed files to 3 separate email addresses, 2 of them personal, one belonging to Staff Sergeant Paul Wick, who was currently working as a JAG attorney at Joint Base Lewis McChord, and owed Jake a favor so large it had never been discussed, because discussing it would have required putting a name on what Jake had done in Kandahar, and nobody wanted to do that. He texted Wick, "Check your email. I need a federal contact who handles DoD procurement fraud. I need them today. This morning." He pocketed both drives and walked back out. Vane was still at the table. Maya had him deep in a conversation about assessment documentation protocol, her voice patient and precise, keeping him anchored. She looked up when Jake came back through the door and held his gaze for exactly 1 second. He gave her the smallest nod. Then his phone buzzed. Frank. "Bank's done. You have 80,000 available as a certified draw. I can get the rest by end of day if you need it." "That might be enough for the deposit." Jake turned away from the room, Dad, I need one more thing. What? Cora Rourke. Do you have her number? Another pause. The kind that comes before something that is going to be hard to say. I have it. Why? Because she doesn't know Ghost is here. Nobody told her. And if this goes wrong today and those dogs move tonight, she needs to know her husband's dog was in this building and that someone tried. Frank was quiet for a moment. I'll call her. No, give me the number. She should hear it from me. He wrote it down, stood with it in his hand for 10 seconds. Then he dialed. It rang 3 times. A woman's voice, cautious, not unfriendly. The voice of someone who has learned to answer unknown numbers carefully, because unknown numbers sometimes carry news. Mrs. Rourke, my name is Jake Mercer. I served with Danny in Fallujah. We met once, at the base family day in 2019. I don't know if you remember me. A beat of silence.
I remember you. Danny talked about you.
Jake's throat tightened. I'm at Fort Braxton right now. I'm looking at Ghost. The silence that followed was different from every silence before it. It wasn't the silence of a woman processing information. It was the silence of a woman who has spent 18 months believing a particular door was closed, who has just heard someone knock on it from the other side. He's alive, Cora Rourke said. Not a question. Something between a question and a statement. The kind of sentence that a person says when they are testing whether the world is real. He's alive. He's thin and he looks rough, but he's alive. And I am going to bring him home to you. I need you to trust me on that. What's happening? Why is he there? I don't have time to explain everything right now, but I need you to trust me for the next 12 hours. Can you do that? Her voice, when it came back, was steadier than he expected. Steadier than most people would have been.
Danny trusted you, she said. That's enough for me.
Jake hung up. He stood with the phone in his hand and the weight of that sentence sitting in his chest. The particular weight of being trusted by someone who has no reason left to trust anything. And he let himself feel it for exactly 3 seconds because that was all the time he had. Then Vane's voice cut across the room. Chief Mercer. Jake turned. Vane was standing away from the table now. He had his arms folded and his chin level, and his clipboard tucked under his arm, and he was looking at Jake with an expression that was entirely calm and entirely wrong. The kind of calm that is not natural, but constructed, built from the outside in, by a man who has been in positions like this before and has always come out the other side. I need to ask you something directly, Vane said, and I need you to be honest with me. Jake waited. Did Dr. Chen share any internal base documentation with you this morning? The room had gone quieter. Several of the civilians had drifted closer without appearing to, the way people do when they sense a confrontation forming and don't want to miss it. I'd like to know why you're asking, Jake said. Because Dr. Chen is currently on administrative review for unauthorized access to disposition records. And if she has shared materials from that review with a civilian or non-assigned personnel, that creates a legal problem for both of them. Vane's eyes were flat and steady. I'm giving you a chance to be straightforward with me before this gets complicated. Maya had gone very still near the wall. Jake looked at Vane for a long moment, long enough to let the man know that whatever he expected to see in Jake's expression, fear or calculation or retreat, was not going to be there. I came here this morning to bid on dogs, Jake said. That's all I'm doing. Vane held the look. Bidding opens in 8 minutes, he said. Then he turned back to the table. Jake exhaled slowly, looked at Maya, mouthed 2 words. He knows. She looked back at him with the face of a woman who has been waiting for this and prepared for it and is still afraid and doing it anyway. Jake's phone buzzed. Wick. One line. Files received. Making a call. Do not leave that building. 8 minutes came and went. Vane stepped to the front of the room and announced that the bidding would begin with Dog 1, designation Titan, floor price $8,000. His voice was practiced and flat, the voice of a man running a process he had run before. And Jake stood near the back wall and watched the room and waited for his phone to move. It didn't move. 3 civilians raised their hands for Titan. The bidding climbed to $11,000 in under 2 minutes. Jake watched the heavy man in the leather vest go to 12. Watched a second man counter at 13. Watched Vane's pen move across the form with the smooth efficiency of someone who was not thinking about what the number meant, only that it was a number, only that it was moving in the right direction. Jake raised his hand. 15,000. The room turned. Vane looked at him with eyes that didn't change. 15,000 from Chief Mercer. Do I have 16? The man in the leather vest studied Jake for a moment. Something in Jake's posture, or his uniform, or the way Rex was sitting absolutely still beside him, made the man lower his hand and look away. Sold. Dog 1 to Chief Mercer. Vane made the mark, moved on. Jake bid on every dog. Not aggressively, not emotionally. The way a man bids when he has done the math and knows exactly what he can absorb, and is not going to go past it, because going past it helps no one. He won 7 of the first 8, lost blitz to a bid that jumped past his ceiling too fast. A jump that came from a man in the back who had not spoken once during the entire morning, and who Jake now understood was not a civilian buyer at all. He was a placeholder, a staged bid, there to drive prices up, to burn through Jake's deposit faster. Jake looked at Maya. She had seen it too. Her jaw was tight. I need to make a call, Jake said quietly. He stepped toward the door. Vane's voice followed him. Bidding is ongoing, Chief Mercer. If you leave the floor, you forfeit your active position. I'll be 30 seconds. Rules are rules. Jake stopped, turned slowly. The room was watching. Vane was watching. The man in the back, who wasn't a civilian buyer, was watching. Rex sat at Jake's heel and watched all of them. Jake walked back to his position and stayed. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He could not look at it. Blitz went to the man in the back for 19,000. Ranger went to Jake for 9. When they reached Ghost's kennel, Jake felt something shift in the room. A change in pressure, the way it shifts before something breaks. He bid first. Went to 14,000 before anyone else had raised a hand. The man in the back countered at 15. Jake went to 16. 15.5. 16.5. 17. The man in the back dropped out. Jake exhaled. He looked at the kennel. Ghost had lifted his head during the bidding, just barely, just enough to track the sound of Jake's voice moving through the room. When the gavel came down, the dog laid his head back on his paws, but his tail moved. Once. Slow. Barely there, but there. Jake had 11 dogs. 3 had gone to other bidders. He did not know where those 3 were going, and that knowledge sat in him like a splinter he couldn't reach. After the last gavel, Vane began processing paperwork at the table. Jake walked straight to him and placed his certified draw on the table without being asked. Vane looked at it, picked it up, examined it, set it down. This covers 8 of the 11. The remaining balance is due before transfer. My bank is processing the remainder now. I'll have it within 2 hours. Transfer cannot occur until full payment is received. I understand that. The dogs remain in facility custody until that time. That's fine. Jake held Vane's eyes. As long as they stay in this building. Something moved behind Vane's expression. Fast, almost invisible, the way a card moves under a table when a man thinks no one is watching. Of course, Vane said. Standard protocol. Jake walked away from the table, pulled out his phone. Wick had called twice. Jake stepped outside and called back. Wick picked up before the second ring. Tell me exactly what you have on that drive. 2 years of transaction records between Vane and a contractor called Gulf Sentinel Security. Export license applications signed by a Colonel Hargrove, who retired in March of last year. Assessment records showing retroactive grade changes on all 14 dogs inside a 3-week window. Wick was quiet for 4 seconds. The Hargrove signature is the problem. If those signatures are fabricated, that's federal document fraud on top of the procurement violation. That's not a base JAG matter anymore. That's FBI. How fast can you get someone there? I've already made the call. There's an agent out of the Richmond field office named Carver. She's been working military contractor fraud for 3 years. I sent her the files 20 minutes ago. A pause. Jake, she needs the original documentation, the physical records, not copies. Jake thought about the file cabinet in the kennel facility office, the locked one. I'll get them. Do not get arrested trying to get them. I need you functional. I'll be functional. He hung up, went back inside. Maya was refilling water bowls in the kennel row, moving methodically, her hands steady, her face doing the thing it did when she was thinking hard and keeping it off the surface. Jake fell in beside her and kept his voice at the level of a conversation about nothing. Where does Vane keep his original procurement files? Back office, metal cabinet, bottom drawer. He locks it when he leaves the room. Maya didn't look up from the water bowl. He leaves the room every day at 11:15 to call his supervisor. Takes about 12 minutes. He takes his keys. Does the cabinet open with a standard master key? No, it's a personal padlock. 3-digit combination. She moved to the next kennel. The combination is 174. I saw him open it 3 weeks ago. I wasn't supposed to. Jake looked at her. You've been planning for this. I've been hoping for this, she said. There's a difference. She finally looked at him, direct. No softness in it. Just the look of someone who has been carrying something alone for a long time and is very tired. Those 3 dogs that went to other bidders this morning. I know one of them. Coda. Patrol dog. 5 years of service. Handler died of a heart attack on base 14 months ago. Coda waited in the kennel for 2 weeks before anyone told him his handler wasn't coming back. She moved to the next kennel, steady, deliberate. The man who bought him today is listed on the Gulf Sentinel contractor manifest. I pulled the list this morning before the auction. Jake stopped moving. The buyers were plants. Some of them. Enough of them. Maya set down the water container. Vane needed civilian paperwork. Real names, real bid records, real transfer forms. So he brought in contractors disguised as civilians to create the document trail. It looks like a legitimate domestic adoption event. Meanwhile, the export paperwork runs through a separate channel tonight. She looked at the kennels. By morning, those dogs are on a cargo flight to Abu Dhabi. The rage that moved through Jake was cold, not hot. The hot kind made you loud and sloppy. The cold kind made you precise. He had learned the difference a long time ago, in places where the wrong kind of anger got people killed. 11:15, Jake said. 11:15, Maya confirmed. They had 40 minutes. Jake spent them at the certified deposit table, filling out paperwork at a pace that kept Vane occupied, asking procedural questions, requesting form clarifications, making himself the most administratively demanding bidder in the room. He watched the clock, watched the door. watched Vane's hand go to his pocket twice, checking his phone. The small, restless gesture of a man expecting a call. At 11:14, Vane said to the assistant behind the table, "Cover this. I'll be back in 10. He walked through the back door. Jake counted to 30. Then he moved. The back office was unlocked. The metal cabinet was in the corner. Jake was on his knees in front of it in under a minute. Rex positioned himself at the door, facing the hallway, ears forward, body still. If anyone came down that corridor, Jake would have 4 seconds of warning. He dialed 174. The padlock released. The bottom drawer held 3 folders and a sealed envelope. Jake photographed everything with his phone before touching it, then opened the first folder. Transaction records, 14 pages. Wire transfers from a Gulf Sentinel account in Bahrain to a private LLC registered in Delaware with no public ownership record. Jake photographed every page. Second folder, the export license applications. 6 documents, each carrying Colonel Hargrove's signature. Jake photographed them and then stopped on the 3rd page and looked at it more carefully. The signature was right. The formatting was right. But the DoD authorization stamp in the bottom right corner used a code prefix that had been discontinued in October of last year. He had only known that because Wick had mentioned it once during a case briefing Jake had sat in on by accident. Nobody outside the JAG system would have caught it. Vane hadn't caught it, or hadn't cared, or had counted on nobody looking. Jake photographed it twice, sent everything to Wick and to Agent Carver's number, which Wick had texted him an hour ago. Then he closed the drawer, reset the combination, stood up, and walked back out to the kennel floor. Rex fell in beside him without being told. Vane came back through the door at 11:28. He looked at Jake. Jake was standing at Ghost's kennel, his hand through the bars, letting the dog press his nose against his fingers. He didn't look up. Didn't acknowledge Vane crossing the room. Just stayed there with his hand against the bars and felt Ghost breathing. Shallow but steady, the chest rising and falling against Jake's palm through the steel. Then Vane's phone rang. He answered it, listened, and Jake watched the color change in the man's face. Not all at once, but in stages, the way a wall changes color when the water damage behind it finally comes through. Vane said nothing into the phone, just listened. Then he lowered it and looked across the room at Jake with an expression that was no longer calm and no longer constructed. It was the expression of a man who has just understood that the ground he was standing on was never as solid as he believed. Jake looked back at him, kept his hand against Ghost's kennel bars. His own phone buzzed. A text from Wick. 2 words. Carver's coming. Agent Carver arrived at Fort Braxton at 12:47 in the afternoon in a gray sedan with government plates and no markings. She was 40, short, with the kind of face that gave nothing away without deciding to. And she walked through the facility gate like someone who had already read the room before entering it. She had 2 agents with her. Neither of them announced themselves. Neither of them needed to. Jake met her in the hallway outside the kennel floor. "Chief Mercer," she extended her hand. Firm, brief, direct. "Sarah Carver, FBI Richmond. Wick speaks well of you." "Did he tell you what's on the drive?" "He told me enough. I've reviewed the documents you sent." She glanced past him toward the kennel room door. "Where's Vane now?" "His office. He's been in there since his phone call. He hasn't come out." "Who else is in the building?" "Maya Chen, the vet tech. 2 base security personnel at the east entrance. The civilian buyers left after the auction. The staged bidder left first." Carver nodded. "The staged bidder is named Osman Khalid, Gulf Sentinel Regional Procurement Coordinator. We've had a file on Gulf Sentinel for 14 months. This is the first domestic contact point we've been able to place inside a U.S. military facility. She looked at Jake directly. You understand what that means? It means this isn't just Vane. It means Vane is one piece. She said it without emphasis, without drama. The way people say things when the facts are already heavy enough without help. I need you to stay calm and stay visible. Don't confront him. Don't give him a reason to destroy anything before we get into that office. He already knows something is happening. His face told me when he got that call. What call? Unknown number. About 11:30. He listened for 40 seconds, said nothing, hung up. Looked at me like he was doing arithmetic. Carver processed that. Someone tipped him. She turned to one of her agents and said something in a low voice. He moved away down the hall. Then she looked back at Jake. I need 5 minutes to set up.
Keep him where he is. Jake went back to the kennel floor. Rex met him at the door. The dog had been working the room in Jake's absence, moving slowly between the kennels, pausing at each one, performing his own kind of check that had nothing to do with training and everything to do with the particular attentiveness that working dogs carry even after the mission is over. Jake put his hand on Rex's head, and they walked together to Ghost's kennel and stood there, and Jake let himself breathe. Ghost was sitting up now, not fully, not the clean, upright posture of a dog that felt well, but up, watching Jake with eyes that were clearer than they had been that morning, as if something in the last few hours, the sound of Jake's voice, the presence of Rex, the simple fact of being acknowledged, had begun pulling him back from wherever he had gone. Almost, Jake told him quietly. Just a little longer. Ghost's tail moved. Then the door to Vane's office opened. Vane came out carrying a leather satchel. He had his jacket on, his cover under his arm, and he was moving with the specific purpose of a man who has made a decision and is executing it before the window closes. He crossed the floor toward the east exit and did not look at Jake. Jake stepped into the center of the aisle. Commander. Vane stopped, looked at him. The calculation in his eyes was naked now, no longer concealed behind the practiced calm of the morning. I'm stepping out for a personnel matter. The transfer paperwork for my 11 dogs isn't complete. My assistant will finish it. You told me transfer requires your authorization. Procedures can be delegated. Vane moved to step around him. Rex shifted. One step, quiet, precise, directly into the line Vane was trying to take. The dog didn't growl, didn't raise his hackles. He simply moved into the space and stood in it, and looked at Vane with the focused, patient attention of an animal that has been trained to hold positions and will not be argued out of them. Vane looked at the dog, then at Jake. Control your animal. He's controlled, Jake said. He's just standing there. A beat of silence. Somewhere behind Jake, down the hallway, a door opened. Carver's voice, even and clear. Lieutenant Commander Vane, FBI. I need you to stay where you are, please. Vane turned, saw Carver, saw the badge, and something in the satchel under his arm shifted as his grip tightened on it, and his jaw set, and his eyes moved across the room the way eyes move when a man is calculating exits he already knows he doesn't have. I'd like to call my attorney, Vane said. You can do that, Carver said. Right after I take that bag. He handed it over. His hand was steady. Jake gave him that. Whatever else the man was, his hand was steady. Carver passed the satchel to her agent without opening it. Kept her eyes on Vane. Lieutenant Commander, I'm going to ask you to come with me to the conference room. You're not under arrest at this moment. You are required to cooperate with a federal inquiry under Title 18, Section 1031. Do you understand that?
I understand it, Vane said. His voice had gone flat, the affect stripped out of it completely, like a man who has spent the last 20 minutes getting to a place past emotion and has arrived. He looked at Jake one more time before Carver's agent positioned himself at his shoulder. The look wasn't anger. It wasn't fear. It was something closer to recognition. The expression of a man who has been beaten by someone he underestimated, and knows it, and is finished pretending otherwise. He walked with Carver down the hall, and the door closed behind them. Jake stood in the kennel aisle and let out a breath that had been waiting since 04:30 that morning. Maya appeared from the far end of the row. She had her arms crossed, and her eyes were bright in the way that is not happiness exactly, but is the thing that comes after you have been afraid for a long time, and the thing you were afraid of has finally arrived and is being dealt with by people with badges and federal authority. "Is it over?" she asked. "This part," Jake said. "The next part is paperwork." She laughed. It was short and not entirely steady, but it was real, and in that room, with those dogs watching through the kennel bars, it was enough. The next 3 hours were paperwork. Federal paperwork, which is its own particular variety of slow. The kind that requires signatures in specific sequences and witnesses for things that don't obviously need witnesses, and waiting in rooms while people make calls to verify things that are in the documents they are already holding. Carver's team worked through the facility office. A base commander arrived, a rear admiral named Stokes, who had been called down from Washington, and who walked through the building with his cover under his arm, and an expression of controlled fury that he aimed primarily at the empty chair behind Vane's desk. Stokes looked at the kennel floor, looked at the 14 dogs, looked at Jake standing in the middle of it all in his NWU Type 3, with Rex at his heel, and said only, "How many are yours?" 11, sir, pending full payment, which I'm clearing today." "Consider them cleared." Stokes looked at Carver. "What does the federal piece look like?" "Document fraud, procurement fraud, unauthorized export of government assets. If the Gulf Sentinel connection goes where I think it goes, we're looking at violations of the International Traffic in Arms regulations as well." Carver said it with the efficiency of someone reading a grocery list. "We'll need full cooperation from base personnel on the records side." "You'll have it." Stokes said it like a man who means it and is angry that it needed to be said. He looked back at Jake. "These dogs served this country." "Yes, sir." "They should have been taken care of." "Yes, sir. They should have." Stokes nodded once, walked back toward the office. The conversation was over, and everything necessary had been said. At 3 in the afternoon, Jake's phone rang. Cora Rourke. He stepped outside to take it. "Is it done?" she asked. "Ghost is mine, legally, as of about an hour ago. He's in the kennel right now, and he's okay. He needs a vet and some time, and good food, and a family." A pause. "He needs you." He heard her breathing change, heard the specific quiet of a woman fighting to keep something together that very much wants to come apart. "Can I come tomorrow?" she asked. "I'll be at my family's farm in Shenandoah. I can send you the address tonight. Come whenever you're ready." Jake leaned against the outside wall and looked at nothing, and said the thing he had been carrying since he found out. "Cora, I should have found him sooner. I should have pushed harder when they told me he was transferred. I'm sorry." "You found him today," she said. "That's what Danny would say. He always said you find people when they need you, not when it's convenient." Her voice broke slightly on the last word and held on the other side of it. "Bring him home, Jake. He'll be there when you arrive." He hung up, stood outside for a moment. The afternoon had gone quiet in the way that follows the kind of noise that isn't sound but pressure, and he felt it lifting off his shoulders in increments. Not all at once, not clean, the way these things never leave all at once, or clean. His phone moved again. Frank. Jake, there's a woman on the local news, Cora Rourke. She's talking about Ghost. She's talking about you. Jake closed his eyes. How bad? Bad isn't the word. It's been shared 40,000 times in 2 hours. People are calling the base, calling the congressman's office. Someone posted a photograph of Ghost from Danny's last deployment. It's everywhere. Jake opened his eyes, thought about Vane in a conference room somewhere in this building, his attorney on the phone, his carefully constructed paper trail now in the hands of an FBI agent who had been waiting 14 months for a domestic contact point. Thought about 3 dogs that had gone to staged bidders that morning and were somewhere on this base and had not yet been located. Dad, I need you to call Wick again. 3 dogs were purchased by contractors this morning. I need to know where they are before end of day. I'll call him now. Frank paused. Son, what you did today? I haven't finished yet. No, but Danny would have. Jake looked at the door. Behind it, 11 dogs that needed water and food and a 6-hour drive to a farm in Shenandoah, and the beginning of whatever came after the worst thing that had happened to them. Behind it, 1 dog, whose tail had moved once that morning and twice by afternoon, and who was, slowly and with great effort, learning to believe again that someone was coming. Tell Mom to get the back kennels ready, Jake said. We'll be home by midnight. They found the 3 missing dogs at 4:22 in the afternoon. Wick had tracked the transfer paperwork through the base logistics system and flagged a holding order that had been quietly filed that morning under a maintenance designation. The kind of bureaucratic camouflage that worked because nobody looked at maintenance orders twice. The 3 dogs, Coda, Scout, and a Belgian Malinois named Dex, were in a secondary holding area near the East Vehicle Bay, already loaded into transport crates, stacked inside a contractor panel van with Gulf Sentinel markings painted over in gray primer. Carver's team reached the van 12 minutes before the driver was scheduled to arrive. Jake was there when they opened the back doors. He didn't wait for permission. He climbed in, went straight to Coda's crate, and unlatched it himself. The dog came out low and slow, legs stiff, eyes adjusting. And then his nose found Jake's hand, and something in the animal's posture shifted. The way a held breath releases, the entire body dropping out of the brace it had been holding for hours. You're okay, Jake said. You're coming with me. Carver stood at the van doors watching him. She didn't tell him to wait. She didn't remind him about protocols or custody procedures. She just watched a Navy SEAL in digital camouflage crouched in the back of a contractor van, talking a traumatized dog down from the edge. And she let it happen. When Jake climbed out with Coda on a lead beside him, she said, "That's 14. "That's 14, he said. By 6 o'clock, Vane had been formally placed under arrest and transported to the federal detention facility in Richmond. The charges included procurement fraud, federal document forgery, conspiracy to violate the international traffic and arms regulations, and unauthorized disposition of government property. Carver told Jake quietly that the ITAR charge alone carried a potential sentence of 20 years. The Gulf Sentinel connection had already triggered a parallel investigation in 3 other states. Jake didn't feel satisfaction when he heard it. He felt something quieter and less clean than satisfaction. The kind of feeling that comes when you have stopped something bad from happening and understand that the bad thing had already been happening for 2 years before you arrived, and that somewhere in those 2 years were dogs that didn't make it to the other side. He didn't say that out loud. He filed it away in the place where he kept things that needed to be carried rather than spoken, and he went back to the kennels and started preparing 14 dogs for a 6-hour drive. Maya worked beside him for 2 hours without being asked. She pulled health records on every dog, packed medications, wrote transition care instructions in a handwriting that was small and precise, and thorough in the way of someone who has been thorough their whole life, because the alternative was something going wrong that she could have prevented. When the last kennel was loaded into the 2 vehicles Jake had arranged through Wick's network of people who owed people favors, Maya stood at the loading area with her arms at her sides and her badge still clipped to her jacket, and looked at the convoy with the expression of a woman who has spent 8 months building toward a moment and is now standing inside it and doesn't quite know what her face should do. "Come to the farm," Jake said, "this weekend. See how they're doing." "I will." She looked at him. "I put in my resignation this afternoon." He hadn't expected that. "Maya, I'm not resigning because of what happened today. I'm resigning because of what I watched happen for 8 months before today and didn't stop fast enough." She said it without self-pity, the way people say true things about themselves when they have already finished arguing about it internally. "I should have gone outside the base the day I found the first altered assessment. I waited because I thought the system would handle it. I know better now." "You sent the text," Jake said. "You sent 12 texts, and one of them got through. That matters." "You drove 3 hours before dawn," she said. "That matters more." Jake didn't argue. He shook her hand, and she held it for a moment. And then she let go and walked back inside. And he drove out through the Fort Braxton gate with 14 dogs and didn't look back. They reached the Mercer farm at 11:47 at night. Frank was waiting at the gate with a flashlight and a thermos of coffee and the expression of a man who has not slept and did not try to. He didn't say anything when Jake got out of the lead vehicle. He looked at the convoy. 2 vehicles, 14 dogs, a night that smelled like Virginia farmland and cut grass, and something clean and permanent. And he pressed his hand against Jake's shoulder and kept it there for a moment. "How many need immediate vet attention?" Frank asked. "Ghost, Ranger, Coda." Maya wrote up the notes. "Doc Hensley is already inside. I called her at 4 this afternoon." Frank looked past Jake at the vehicles. "Your mother made food. She's been cooking since I told her you were coming home." Jake laughed. It was short and tired and real. "Of course she has." They unloaded the dogs over the next hour. 14 kennels set up in the back barn. Fresh water, clean bedding. Frank moving between them with the quiet efficiency of a man who has managed animals and soldiers and difficult situations his entire adult life, and does not distinguish much between the 3. Doc Hensley worked through Ghost first, then Ranger, then Coda. Her voice low and steady throughout, reporting findings without alarm, treating without drama. The practiced competence of a country veterinarian who has seen hard cases before and has learned that the best thing you can do for a frightened animal is to be the calmest person in the room. Ghost ate. It was the first time he had eaten a full meal in what Maya's record suggested was at least 3 weeks. He ate with his head down and his tail moving slowly, and Jake sat on the kennel floor beside him and let him eat and didn't say anything, because there was nothing to say that mattered more than just being present. Rex settled himself against the outside of Ghost's kennel and stayed there. Jake found his mother in the kitchen at 1 in the morning, still at the stove, a woman of 61 who had the hands of someone who had worked her whole life and the eyes of someone who had loved people through very hard things and intended to keep doing it. She didn't ask him how it went. She put a plate in front of him and sat across the table and watched him eat. And that was all he needed, and she knew it. He slept 4 hours, woke at 6 when Rex put his nose against his hand. Cora Rourke arrived at 9:15 in the morning. She came with her 2 kids, a boy of 9 and a girl of 7. And she came in the particular way that people come to things they have been hoping for and dreading in equal measure. Shoulders set, chin level, eyes doing the work of holding everything together until she could see for herself whether what she had been told was true. Jake met her at the barn door. She saw Ghost before she said a word. The dog was standing at the kennel gate, ears forward, nose working, his body vibrating with a recognition that started somewhere in his chest and worked outward to his tail and his feet and finally his whole frame. A trembling that was not fear, but the complete opposite of fear. Cora crossed the barn in 10 steps. She dropped to her knees in front of the kennel, and Ghost pressed his whole face through the bars, and she put her hands on either side of his head, and she said Danny's name, once, quietly, the way you say the name of someone you are still talking to, even after they are gone. Ghost cried. The same sound Jake had heard the morning before, the deep, broken cry that shouldn't come from an animal built for silence. It came out of him like something that had been stored under pressure for 18 months, finally released, finally allowed, finally met by someone who understood exactly what it meant. Jake stepped back, gave them the room, felt his throat close around something he did not try to name. The little girl tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Is he happy, Mom?" Cora laughed through her tears. "Yeah, baby. He's very happy." The boy looked up at Jake with the direct, uncomplicated assessment of a 9-year-old who has learned to be careful about trusting people and has not entirely stopped wanting to. "My dad said you were the best soldier he ever knew." Jake crouched down so they were eye level. "Your dad was the best soldier I ever knew. By a lot." The boy thought about that, nodded once, a nod that carried more weight than most adults managed.
"Will Ghost be okay?" "Yes," Jake said. "He's going to be okay." 6 weeks later, Rear Admiral Stokes stood before the Senate Armed Services Subcommittee on Military Personnel and read into the record a full accounting of the Gulf Sentinel procurement scheme, the falsified assessment records, the 2-year export operation that had moved an as-yet undetermined number of retired military working dogs to private security contracts overseas. He named Vane. He named the LLC. He named the discontinued DoD authorization code that had been the crack in the wall that everything else had come through. And then he named Jake Mercer. He described a Navy SEAL who had driven 3 hours before dawn on an anonymous tip, who had walked into a facility and refused to walk back out without 14 dogs, who had operated without authorization, without backup, without any reasonable expectation that it would work, and who had been right. Stokes recommended the establishment of a permanent federal adoption and advocacy program for retired military working dogs, staffed with veterinary and legal resources, accountable to oversight, and named for the people who had made it necessary to have one. They called it the Rourke-Mercer MWD Protection Act. The bill passed 94-6. On the day it was signed into law, Jake was in the backfield of the Mercer farm watching 14 dogs run. Ghost was in front, moving with a looseness in his stride that hadn't been there 6 weeks ago, chasing Titan across the grass with the full-body commitment of an animal that has remembered what it feels like to run without a reason, except that running is good, and the air is good, and the ground is solid under your feet. Rex ran beside Jake, matching his pace, shoulder to shoulder, the way he always had and always would. Frank stood at the fence and watched, and didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, "Danny would have loved this." Jake watched Ghost leap, airborne for 1 full second, tan and black against the morning sky, alive and whole and entirely, irreversibly free. "Yeah," Jake said. "He would have." These dogs gave everything they had. Every deployment, every dark building, every bomb-laden road, every mission with no name that protected lives that would never know theirs. They did not ask for recognition. They did not ask for monuments. They asked for one thing only, the thing that every creature that has ever loved a human being has always asked for: to not be thrown away when the work was done. Jake Mercer heard them crying and refused to walk past. That is what loyalty looks like when it is real. And that is the kind of man, the kind of soldier, the kind of human being that this world is still capable of making. Remember these dogs. Share this story for every dog still waiting. And never, for as long as you live, walk past someone who needs you. That is the mission. It always was.